The displacement. He knew something was wrong the moment he opened his eyes. The ceiling had a hairline crack that shouldn't be there. The morning light filtered through curtains that were the wrong shade of blue. Thomas sat up slowly, heart already beginning to race. His wife's side of the bed was empty, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the framed photo on her nightstand, the one showing her with a man who looked almost, but not quite, like him. The smile was his, the eyes were his, but there was something in the expression he couldn't place. Something foreign. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice catching in his throat. The house responded with unfamiliar creaks. The floorboards beneath his feet felt wrong, too solid where they should give slightly, too yielding where they should be firm. He wandered into a kitchen that was his but rearranged, finding a note in handwriting that resembled his wife's but with subtle differences in the loops and curves. "Working late tonight. Don't forget Mom's birthday dinner." His mother had been dead for 6 years. Thomas stumbled backward, bracing himself against the counter. A wave of nausea hit him as he noticed other discrepancies. The coffee maker was on the left instead of the right. The refrigerator had family photos he didn't recognize, and the calendar on the wall showed appointments with people whose names stirred no recognition. He splashed cold water on his face, hoping to shock himself awake from whatever nightmare this was, but the water felt real. Too real. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection stared back with haunted eyes. There was a thin scar along his jawline that he'd never had before, and his hair was parted on the opposite side. As the day unfolded, Thomas discovered a life almost identical to his own, but with critical differences. His key fob opened a car similar to his, but with a dent in the passenger door he didn't remember. The route to work was the same, but the coffee shop on the corner was now a pharmacy. His office building looked identical from the outside, but his office was 3 doors down from where it should be. His colleagues treated him normally, but referenced projects he'd never worked on. They laughed about a company retreat he had no memory of attending. His computer password worked, but the desktop layout was wrong, and the family photo set as his background showed them at the Grand Canyon, a trip they'd talked about but never taken. "You feeling all right, Thomas?" his boss asked during their morning meeting. "You seem distracted." "Just tired," he lied, wondering if his face betrayed the screaming in his mind. His phone contained photos of vacations he'd never taken, text messages referencing conversations he'd never had. There were apps he didn't recognize, and contacts with unfamiliar names tagged as close friends. When he called his brother, the conversation flowed normally until his brother mentioned their father's new wife, but their father had never remarried after the divorce. He tried explaining to Sarah that night. He sat her down at the dining table, positioned against the wrong wall, and told her he didn't belong here, that things were wrong, that he was from somewhere else where details were different. She looked at him with concern, then fear, then called a doctor. "You've been working too hard," she said, her hand trembling as she dialed. "Remember what happened last year? The doctor said if you had another episode." Another episode. The words hung in the air like a threat. The doctor came, an older man with kind eyes who seemed to know Thomas well. He found nothing physically wrong, but prescribed medication Thomas knew he shouldn't need. "The delusions are back," the doctor told Sarah in hushed tones that Thomas could still hear. "We caught it earlier this time." Days became weeks. Research into parallel universes and quantum displacement filled his nights while he pretended to be the Thomas everyone here knew during the days. The medication remained untouched in his drawer, hidden behind socks that were identical to his but somehow felt wrong against his skin. He created detailed lists of discrepancies: his mother alive, his father remarried, the scar on his face, the Grand Canyon trip, the different projects at work. He documented the subtle differences in Sarah: how she took her coffee with 1 sugar instead of 2, how she slept on her right side instead of her left, how she called him Tom more often than Thomas. Sometimes he'd catch reflections in windows that didn't match his movements, or hear his name whispered from empty rooms. Once, he found a note in his own handwriting in his jacket pocket: "They know you don't belong." He tried retracing his steps from that final night in his real world. The late work, the strange electrical storm. the moment of disorientation before sleep. He returned to his office at night, stood in the parking lot during a thunderstorm, tried sleeping in different positions. Nothing worked. He considered telling Sarah the truth again, but the memory of her fear stopped him. Instead, he pretended. He became an actor in a life that was almost his, learning his lines on the fly, studying photos and emails to understand his history here. He took half doses of the medication to appear compliant while keeping his mind clear. 3 months in, he found the journal. Hidden in his home office behind books on a shelf was a leather-bound notebook filled with his handwriting. Frantic at first, then increasingly organized, it documented another Thomas's experience of displacement, of waking up in a world that was wrong, of a wife who didn't quite know him. The final entry was dated 1 week before Thomas's own displacement. "I've found a way back. The intersection of Maple and 5th, midnight during an electrical storm. The barrier is thinnest there. If it doesn't work, I've left this record for whoever comes next. We can't all belong here." In quiet moments, Thomas wondered if somewhere in the reality he called home, another version of himself was living his life, loving his wife, and if that other Thomas was trying just as desperately to get back where he belonged. Or worse, if that Thomas had no desire to leave at all. The next electrical storm came 3 days later. Thomas stood at the intersection of Maple and 5th as midnight approached, rain soaking through his clothes, lightning fragmenting the sky above. As the clock on his phone hit midnight, a bolt struck nearby, and for a moment, the world seemed to flicker like a faulty television signal. In that flicker, Thomas saw himself, or another Thomas, standing on the opposite corner, staring back with recognition and horror. Their eyes met across the dimensional divide, and Thomas understood with crushing clarity. There was no going back. There was only displacement, an endless cycle of Thomases shifting between realities, each leaving a void that pulled another in. The flicker ended. The other, Thomas, vanished. The rain continued to fall on an empty street corner. Thomas walked home to a life that would never truly be his, carrying the burden of knowledge that someday another would take his place.